Welcome to the Wisdom That Breathes channel. Across all our platforms, we try to share wisdom which is relevant and accessible to everyone. But on this particular platform, we go deeper into some of the ancient principles found within the scriptures. If you find some of the terminology difficult or inaccessible, then go over to our Keshava Swami YouTube channel where you'll be able to find other content which is perhaps more relatable. Thank you and enjoy the wisdom that breathes. Hare Krishna everyone, so thank you so much for coming. So this evening we're continuing a discussion on the Bhagavad Gita, opening the jewel box. The reason I've called it a jewel box is because that's what our acharyas actually call the Bhagavad Gita. As you know, the Bhagavad Gita is split into 3 sections, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says it's just like a jewel box has a base. And the base of the jewel box of the Bhagavad Gita is the first 6 chapters, which are known as Karma Yoga, because they form the basis of how to live in this world. Every single day we have to wake up and function with material nature, and that's an art, how to live in the world but not be affected by it, as they say in the Christian tradition, in the world but not of it. So that is all described by Krishna in the first 6 chapters of the Gita. And therefore Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that is like the base of the jewel box. He says the final 6 chapters are like the lid of the jewel box, because as we live in this world we need knowledge which protects us from the influences around us, which gives us a sense of detachment from the onslaught of the material world. So in the final 6 chapters, Krishna talks about the threats of the three modes of nature, the threats of demoniac mentality, the threats of what can happen in this world, which is a reflection, Krishna says in the 15th chapter. And therefore Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says the last 6 chapters are like a lid which protect us from this world. And he says the middle 6 chapters, as we all know, is the actual jewel. And what he says is, just as there is inscription on the top of the lid, on the top of any jewel box, so the final most important verse of the Bhagavad Gita in the 18th chapter, Krishna says, Manmana bhavamad bhakto. So that's the inscription on the top of the jewel box, on the top of the lid in the 18th chapter. And he said that exactly indicates what's right in the middle, because right in the middle, Krishna says in the 19th chapter, Manmana bhavamad bhakto. 9th chapter, sorry. So right, whatever he writes on the lid, that is what is contained in the middle, because the 18th chapter verse and the 9th chapter verse mirror each other. So yesterday we talked a little bit about the history of the Bhagavad Gita, how it reaches us. We talked about the importance of having spiritual knowledge and how sometimes it's difficult because knowledge is lost. But by the grace of the Acharyas and specifically Srila Prabhupada, we get access again. We talked about some of the history of how the Gita comes down in Parampara and how we're receiving it through the spiritual line. And then we talked about once the Gita appears in this world, how many people commentate on the Gita. Actually, Krishna himself is the first to commentate on his own book. I forgot to mention this yesterday. Because after Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita in Mahabharata, then later on, in some chapters later, once Krishna is settled in Dwarka and the Pandavas are established, Krishna speaks another conversation to Arjuna called the Anugita, in which he begins to expound further information. In ISKCON, we don't hear so much about the Anugita, but that is also there within the Mahabharata. And then later on the eve of Krishna's departure from this world, he speaks another Gita to Uddhava this time, that's known as the Uddhava Gita. And Srila Prabhupada in the Bhagavatam, he writes that in order to complete the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spoke the Uddhava Gita before he left this world. So in one sense, we can say the first commentator on the Bhagavad Gita was the speaker himself, Krishna, who spoke the Anugita and the Uddhava Gita. But then, as we know, the different Vaishnavacharyas all offer their illuminations, because there can be so much insight into the words of the Gita. And then we hear about how in the 17th and 18th centuries there are more commentaries, but then those commentators also come in who begin to use the Bhagavad Gita for different purposes. The Bhagavad Gita also goes west outside of India and begins gaining influence in many, many places. And then Srila Prabhupada comes in 1965, and Srila Prabhupada wants to now represent to the Western world the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Was it a proud statement to say as it is? No. Because Srila Prabhupada was basing this on the authority of who can actually present the Gita. He was presenting it with transparency, and he was also giving the applicability. He wasn't just giving a philosophy, but he was actually doing what Krishna does in the Gita, which he gives Arjuna a call to action. So spiritual knowledge is never theoretical. His Holiness Hridayananda Maharaj, who was of course a great intellectual, studied at Harvard University, he said, what I really appreciated when I came to the temple is that I heard a class and the speaker said, everyone is an eternal servant of Krishna. And at the end of the class, they gave me a mop and they said, now sweep the floor. And he said, I really appreciated that, because my whole life I studied philosophy, but it was never applied. It was just all gymnastics in the mind. But Srila Prabhupada told us, yes, this is what Krishna says, and this is what you should do. So in that miraculous pastime with Brahmananda Prabhu as the instrument, Srila Prabhupada with Macmillan published the Gita, and since then so many Gitas have been published. And that's why today we have in our hands the Bhagavad Gita. It's a great fortune. Nowadays we have all varieties of books, we have them on all devices, and sometimes we can become so familiar, we can become so, we just take it for granted. And this is actually the most advanced knowledge in the universe, and it has the power. After Arjun hears the whole Bhagavad Gita, later on after the Kurukshetra battle, he says a very beautiful verse. Deshakalartha yuktani rittapo pashamani cha haranti smarataschitam govinda bihitani me. After the whole Mahabharat war, Arjun says, Deshakalartha yuktani rittapo pashamani cha. He says, now I'm remembering those words that Krishna spoke to me. Desha, kala, yuktani. Whatever place you may be in, whatever time you may be in, and whatever circumstance you may be in, these words of Krishna have the ability to rittapo pashamani cha, to relieve the burning heart. Arjun was crying after the Kurukshetra battle because of lost relationships and so much upheaval. Then he said, now I'm remembering again those instructions. Just like Arjun cried on the battlefield when Abhimanyu died, but then he remembered Krishna's instructions. So in this world, everyone will cry, because the world is designed to make us cry. But when we cry, if we're connected to the Gita, rittapo pashamani cha, then we will feel a pacification of the heart, because Krishna's words, desha kalartha yuktani, they're timeless. Doesn't matter what place, time or circumstance, they can relieve the heart. So this is the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita. And today what I thought is we could do something a little bit different. We could look at how does the Gita really apply in our world today, and how can we present the Gita to the world, because this is what Srila Prabhupada wants us to do. Srila Prabhupada wants to make the Bhagavad Gita the most popular book in the world. But in order to do that, we really have to tune in and see how can we explain what Krishna has given us in the Gita in a way that really meets people where they are. This is a very great art. I was just in Antwerp, and I was sharing with the devotees that atheism means people believe in how many gods? No gods. Monotheism means people believe in how many gods? Polytheism means people believe in how many gods? Many. Pantheism means people believe what is God? Or nature. Autotheism means they believe who is God? Themselves. But there's something else now which is becoming more popular than any of these, and that is apatheism. Apatheism is basically people who are not atheistic, they're not even agnostic, they're definitely not monotheistic or polytheistic. They're just apatheistic. They're just apathetic. They just believe religion doesn't even matter. It's irrelevant. It's not even worth the time to explore, because it has nothing to do with my life. It's not going to help me in any way. And that perhaps is the saddest philosophy, that people just see the scripture as completely disconnected from their life. It's not going to help me. And therefore what we see now in the world is a movement away from religion and a movement towards self-development. Because people want to develop themselves, they actually want to improve themselves, they actually want to experience some change of character, some empowerment in their life. And so in the world today, what are some of the most popular self-development books? Now we'll find out who's reading self-development books. It's okay, we're not trying to catch you out here. What are some of the secret? The secret, look at that first off the shelf. Very good. What other self-development books are there? Atomic Habits. Okay, excellent. That was the third one I had here. Very good. The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Any other good ones you read?
Habits of Successful.
7 Habits. Oh my God, look at that.
16 lessons on to be successful.
16, okay.
Carnegie.
Oh, okay. Not read that one. But yeah.
Think and grow rich.
Think and grow rich. Yeah, we're going to do that. Power of Now. These are some of the, perhaps the most important or the most prevalent self-development books. This is what people are interested in. Because they want something that's going to help them. They want something that when they wake up tomorrow, they can apply it, they can live it. Unfortunately, we live in a very unphilosophical age. So therefore, people are not looking for ultimate answers, they're looking for immediate transformation. So, the reality is that self-development without spiritual development doesn't actually work. Now there's a whole movement against self-development. The self-development industry is huge. $50 billion a year, self-development. And they say in the next 5 years is going to double. Because everyone is trying to become the best version of themselves. The amazing thing is, unless you spiritually develop yourself, you can't actually develop yourself. Self-development without spiritual development just stagnates. And therefore, what's often happened is we've divorced these two things, spiritual development and self-development. But actually, the Gita perfectly marries these two things. Over time, I teach the Gita in different ways, but this is one way that I teach the Gita to people and show them how if you follow the Bhagavad Gita and what Krishna is teaching Arjuna in these pages is actually the ultimate self-development guide. Because the first thing that Krishna teaches Arjuna is how to redefine success. You can't be successful everyone wants to be successful. That's the basis of self-development. But you can't be successful unless you define success. And therefore, if you look at the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the whole thought process of Arjuna is that he's basically challenging himself as to what his definition of success is. And Arjuna is saying, what I'm actually about to achieve here, is it really going to make me happy? And the most amazing thing is most people don't even do that first step of challenging their definition of success. And therefore you can't discover what true success is until you identify what success is not. And therefore the whole first chapter of the Gita is all about redefining success. Then what I share with people is the second chapter of the Gita is all about rediscovering your identity. One of the biggest things in the world now is authenticity. Most people feel like they're suffering from what they call imposter syndrome. They're doing something, they're acting in a certain way, they're playing a role, but they're not really able to be themselves. One person says, I'm not who I think I am, I'm not who you think I am, I'm who I think you think I am. That's how disconnected from our authenticity we've become. So what does Krishna do in the Bhagavad Gita? First, he goes to the highest, the deepest level of authenticity by explaining to Arjuna that you're not the body, but rather you're a spiritual being. And from there, Krishna explains as a spiritual being, you have a subtle covering, a mind, intelligence, and ego. You take on an influence of a certain configuration of the molds. You develop a personality. And like this, you begin to understand who you are. Unless you know who you are, you can never find happiness. And therefore, if you really want to find your authenticity, the Bhagavad Gita teaches you how to be authentic. And then, in the next chapters of the Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna how to reposition his lifestyle. This is one of the biggest concerns of people in the world today. They call it work-life balance. How do I manage my day-to-day duties and at the same time follow my deeper callings that I have in my heart? And that's exactly what Arjuna is struggling with. Arjuna is basically struggling with work-life balance. And therefore he says to Arjuna, I want to quit. I want to quit my job because I can't balance this. So Krishna says, no, you don't need to quit your job. You just need to understand how to balance it. Karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Just understand what mentality, what mode. Karma yoga, how to act in this world, but how to find balance. This is very relevant. Can you begin to see how relevant what Krishna is presenting in the Bhagavad Gita, Desha Kalartha Yuktani, is relevant in all times, places and circumstances. Then, what does the World Health Organization say is going to be the biggest health problem facing society in the world in the coming years, if not already? It's not physical problems, it's problems with the mind. So what does Krishna do? After Arjuna's heard everything, Krishna says, look Arjuna, you're not going to be successful in anything, material or spiritual, unless you learn how to control your mind. And therefore Krishna gives a whole chapter, practically the majority of that chapter, talking about how to deal with the mind. And not just superficial ailments for the mind, but a deep understanding of the dynamics of how the mind, the soul and the body are interacting with each other. Krishna is giving the most practical knowledge. And then, do we just seek success in our life? No, we seek relationships, we seek love. And so in the Bhakti chapters, Krishna begins to explain how to reawaken true love. The interesting thing is, if you look at the Bhakti chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, they're actually talking about the dynamics of how we can connect to Krishna in pure love. But if you take the principles of what Krishna says we should do with him in order to connect with him in pure love, if you take the principles of those things and you apply it to your relationships of this world, they still work. There's many things which Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita about how to develop bhakti for him, which are universal principles which will work in any relationship. And therefore, even if an atheistic person wants to read the Bhagavad Gita, they can still get something out of it, even if they don't believe in Krishna. But what Krishna says in these chapters is that if you really want to have the deepest relationships of love, then first you connect with me. First re-establish that deepest relationship, and from there every other relationship will flourish. And then Krishna talks about how to reconnect with divinity. In 10 and 11 and 12, he's basically explaining how to detect the Supreme Lord everywhere. This is very relevant, because sometimes people try to draw a barrier or an aggressive demarcation between science and spirituality. They say science is that which can be perceived, that which can be seen, that which can be experienced and empirically proved, and spirituality is just about faith. But in these chapters, Krishna actually begins to explain how you can see divinity everywhere. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pasyati tasyaham na pranashyami sachame na pranashyati. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me, Krishna says. So spirituality can be entirely experiential, entirely perceivable. When I came to the temple, I said to one devotee, I don't know, I'm not sure if Krishna exists. And he looked at me and he said, well, we're not trying to prove to you that Krishna exists. I said, what are you trying to do then? He said, we're not trying to prove to you that Krishna exists. He says, we're giving you the tools, processes, and practices by which you'll be able to perceive the presence of Krishna every moment in your life. We're not trying to make you believe in Krishna. We're empowering you to perceive the presence of Krishna. And that gave me a whole nother vision that the Bhagavad Gita is not a religious book. It's a book which is training us to reconnect with divinity and see the presence. And then from 13 to 17, so much of what Krishna is talking about is the world around us and the energies, the three modes of nature. I believe that the three modes of material nature and what Krishna has taught us in the Bhagavad Gita, the three modes of material nature, are the most incredible model of lifestyle to share with the world. It's the most versatile, the most comprehensive, the most applicable kind of framework which can teach you how to lead every single aspect of your life. If you want to know how to drive your car, you can drive your car in the three modes. If you want to know how to parent your children, you can parent your children in the three modes. If you want to know what kind of food to eat, what environment, what people to surround yourself with, how to study for your exams, through the three modes of material nature and what Krishna describes, you can actually maximize the energy, the influences around you. And this is what self-development is trying to do, give people the best chance of succeeding. But here in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spends 100 of the 700 verses of the Gita talking about the three modes of material nature. And then at the end, what does Arjuna say? Nasta moha shmite labha tat prasadat maya chita stito smi gata sandeha karishye vachanam tava. After getting all of this knowledge, I now know what is my purpose. Again, people haven't. This is one of the biggest things in the world, finding your purpose. When your eyes open in the morning, what is your purpose? They say the best alarm clock in the world is purpose. So that when your eyes open, if you have purpose, then you jump out of bed. So, can you begin to see? This is the Bhagavad Gita. We don't have to divorce spirituality from self-development, but rather see how they are completely integrated. See, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna on a battlefield. That's very significant. Because on a battlefield, there's an immediate pressure and there's an ultimate reality that's looming. The immediate pressure is that there's going to be people attacking you in a few minutes. You need to know what to do. And at the same time, on a battlefield, there's always this thought that any moment can be my last moment and I'm going to go to the next place. And what's the next place? So the battlefield signifies the place in which you need immediate guidance and you need ultimate advice. You need to know how to navigate the immediate surrounding, and you need to know what to do to prepare yourself for that which is beyond. And therefore it's no coincidence that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken on the battlefield, because it's meant to equip you with both. It's not just meant to equip you with the afterlife, it's meant to also equip you with the here life. And therefore, if we're able to share with people how the Bhagavad Gita relates in this way to every single one of their needs, interests and concerns, then we can really touch people's hearts with the Gita and not just give them the immediate benefit that they're looking for, but also help them to find much, much deeper solutions. Therefore they say, if you want a new idea, then go to an old book. It's all been said before. But it just means we have to be able to deliver it in a language that people can understand. Let me just stop here. Does anyone have any questions on this or doubts? Or
I have seen the remote view of the mind.
question about the remodeling of the mind, because at this time in the world we have a lot of remodeling of the mind, starting with a big experimentation with COVID, and now people got completely in situation and in fear, and many things happen from this, and it continues, and how with the teaching you can preserve yourself from the world remolding, which is happening anyway, and now population are manipulated with a lot of fear and a lot of lies, and including the media. So when you hear you in the assembly of devotees, so they know much more, but outside, how do you touch them with the Gita, knowing all those influences who are still very real and not going to disappear by magic? So I can, for myself, I know a bit, small bit, but how can you help the people to shift from those places of complete fear and completely, it's like robotic, empty brain, and you can see it, people, I was in Derby, just watching this little town, and you only see people eating and drinking. It's nothing else. It was very scary. So I thought, wow, what's happening in the mind? You can feel the energetic of what's going on. How can you help with this, please?
Yeah, people have no guidance on what to do with the mind, because practically people have no disconnection time from the mind. They're just in their mind, in that world, and they're just constantly cycling in that world all day, and there's no opportunity for them to take a distance and step away and observe their own mind. And therefore, times when you disconnect from the mind and just observe the mind, that is basically what we're trying to teach people. In the world now, they call it mindfulness. So that's the whole idea of mindfulness, and why that movement has become so big. Because people realize that we're constantly in our mind, and therefore we just get caught in that illusion of the mind. But mindfulness means to step away and to be more conscious of your thoughts. So this is what we have to teach people. But the first thing that Krishna teaches is that you have to disassociate from the mind. And that's the thing that most people don't understand. Instead of identifying with the mind, you have to identify the mind. Most people are identifying with the mind. But Krishna is teaching, identify the mind. You're separate from the mind. And therefore watch your thoughts and let things go, remold your patterns. And therefore then, yes, of course, we have to teach people about meditation, about other introspective techniques, about how to live in sattva. You see, what we're teaching here, the ultimate teaching of the Gita is prema, pure love. And when you get that, everything is solved. But there are other things that the Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita. Along with teaching prema or love, Krishna also teaches dharma. Krishna also teaches sattva. Krishna also teaches achar. So dharma means how to understand your nature. Krishna also teaches sattva, which means how to deal with the energies around you and live in goodness. Krishna also teaches achar, character, and what kind of qualities to imbibe in order to maximize the quality of your existence. And so, these are all the things that can help people to remold the mind. So we're just getting bombarded by messages out there. So, it's... maybe in one of these days I'll also talk about the news and how to deal with the news. Because there's extremes. Like one extreme is to become so enamored by the news of the world that you become intimidated. And another extreme is also to just be kind of indifferent and just disconnect from the reality around you and be oblivious to it all. But perhaps for the Vaishnava, they take a middle ground where they're informed by everything around them. They see what's going on in the world, they understand, but they see it through a lens of knowledge by which it actually uplifts their spirituality. And that's how to actually register everything going on in the world, whether it's COVID or a war or an environmental crisis. Some people watch all of these things and then they just become so exhausted by it all, just depressed, because they have no lens through which to see it. So the Gita helps us to see. At the Manor this year, at the end of the year, I did a presentation on the 18 major news stories of 2023 and how to see each one of them through the Gita. It was very interesting because it's like you just see the Gita in action. Like everything Krishna said is just happening in the world. So yeah, this is why we're so inspired to give people the Gita, because it's really what people need. It's all there in this book. Yes?
So I have a question. In Radhadesh, we're very lucky that we attract every month about 15 people to come to yoga retreats. And we try and talk to them about mindfulness and all kinds of, say, yogic practices. But every time I try and integrate some Krishna consciousness, if I do a meditation, we meditate about Vishnu, then I notice there's some resistance and there's as if it was fear. And sometimes I wonder if it's the same as with a guided tour. Sometimes you notice people, they don't even want to come, they will do the whole tour of the castle, but they won't come in the temple room, as if they feel that if they come in, something's going to change. And I feel that in the same way in a yoga class, that sometimes you can try and bring it in, but it's as if they pull back. I'm wondering, how do you introduce it in a way that they can open up and can speak to them?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in the Bhagavad Gita that when Krishna begins his dialogue with Arjuna, he doesn't begin by talking about his position. He first begins by talking about Arjuna's position. Let's start with you. We'll talk about me later. This is Arjuna, who are you? And it's the easiest point to begin a conversation with people, by trying to distinguish spirit from matter. Everyone feels the limitations of material life. Everyone feels the limitations of the material body. They did a survey to find out the 4 top ways in which people relax in this world. And you know what the 4 top answers were? Number 1, intoxication. Number 2, go to sleep. Number 3, take a holiday. And number 4, watch a movie. What do all 4 of those activities have in common?
They disconnect you.
They're an escape. What people are trying to do to relax is they're basically trying to escape their materialistic world. But none of it is a permanent escape. Because when you go to sleep, you wake up, the movie ends, the intoxication runs out, the holiday comes to an end. So this is the easiest way into which to connect with people, to help them to question, like, what more may there be to life beyond the material goals, beyond the material aspirations, beyond what is it about my life that's not working? Why do we see this imperfection around us? What could be beyond that? And then we can bring in matters of divinity, then naturally flow from there. So if you want to take someone somewhere, first you have to meet them where they are. So whenever you're addressing any audience, ask yourself deeply the question, what is this person's need? What is their issue? And what is their concern? When you know deeply what is the needs, issues and concerns of the people you speak to, then you'll be able to find something in Krishna consciousness which relates to them. And so it's it's just about learning, what are people looking for, and just giving them that experience. And so we can do that. Sometimes you may just have to start sometimes with very simple things. Like sometimes I've done a meditation and I've done japa and people appreciate it. And sometimes I just sit with them and just in complete silence tell them to breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And after that they're like, that was amazing. I'm like, I just gave the holy name here, They kind of liked the holy name, but it was like just the breathing in and out was like, like a paradigm shift, That's like, I could make a living from this, It's quite an easy way of making a living, just tell people to breathe, So it's amazing. Sometimes we just have to start simple and build people up. And a lot of it is just relationship, a lot of sharing Krishna consciousness is just personal connection. It is intimidating to come into a temple. One of our brahmacharis, he told me that he was interested, he's from England, about the Hare Krishna temple. He said he drove into the car park of the manor 6 times. And 6 times he drove to the car park, but he couldn't bring himself to walk out of the car. And on the 7th occasion, he managed to. And anyway, as he was walking, someone gave him some prasadam, which made him feel better. And then he became a brahmachari. So it is intimidating. It takes time. We have to make people feel comfortable. We have to meet them where they are. And that's why just talking in people's language. So much of sharing Krishna consciousness is not actually what you say, it's just the language you use. It's so much about language, So I think you'll find ways, what kind of things can connect to people. Is that okay? Yeah.
Maharaj, you were saying that Bhagavad Gita is very relevant even for atheists. You refer to chapter 7 till 9.
Yeah.
So, my question is, can you give some verses that you think are relevant?
So my point is, what I sometimes tell to people who are atheists is I don't try to pretend that the Bhagavad Gita is not a book of God. It's not a book which is talking about God. But what I say to them is that even if you don't believe in God, there's still so many principles in this book which can just help you in your life. And so to them, of course, if they're open to talking about science and spirituality, I talk to them about science and spirituality and how those two things don't have to be opposed to each other. To those who are more open-minded, I just share to them that science and spirituality are dealing with different domains. I tell people that science is about the study of matter, but spirituality is the study of what matters. Science is the study of how to do things better, but spirituality is the study of how to do better things. Science is the study of how to improve things, but spirituality is the study of how to improve people. So science and spirituality don't have to be opposed. They can actually integrate. But then there is scientism, which is a type of science which just is systematically aimed at taking God out of the picture. So to people who are that way inclined, it may not always be worth it to have a debate. But then what I tell them is, but this has so much. You can read chapters 14, 15, 16, 17 and learn about these 3 energies that pervade everything, and it will inform your lifestyle, your habits. If you live in sattva, basically what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita is that if you live in sattva, then your relationships will thrive, your character will thrive, your achievements will be maximized, your health, physical and mental, will reach its optimum, And if you want to, it will be the springboard from which your spirituality can also manifest. But even if you don't want that one, you still get all the other benefits. So I think sometimes instead of trying to bring people to the top, what we can do is just get them on the ladder. Because sometimes if we try to do it like that, all or nothing, then people just go. So just get them on the ladder, and then they'll appreciate. And when the Bhagavad Gita, they'll be like, wow, this Krishna is quite intelligent. Like what he comes out with is pretty good. It actually works. Maybe there's something to him, and then like that through. So step by step, I think. Is that okay? Anyone else? So I'll just show you a few other things. It's very interesting. So we put this thing together, Gita 3, and what we try to do is look at 3 different ways of looking at the Gita, just to show you how like genius Krishna's words are and how we can really present this to the world. So in this book, Gita 3, what we try to do is we give 3 different sections, and we show how the 18 chapters of the Gita can be seen through 3 different lenses. So the first one I call Think Different. And what we see is that in every chapter of the Gita, Krishna actually gives a paradigm shift. As we grow up in this world with a certain culture, a certain worldview, a certain set of ideas imposed on us, we're taught to think in a certain way. But what Krishna does is in every single chapter, what he does is he shifts the paradigm. So for example, we share in the first chapter that in the world today, the common paradigm that people have is when you have a problem, leave the problem. But Krishna teaches learn from the problem. Someone wants to write a book, I heard, called Dealing with Disappointments. We won't mention who it is. But, we all undergo problems in our life. We all face difficulty every single day. And the gut response of every single person in the world is when they have problems, they just try to leave the problem, run away from the problem, immediately solve the problem. Now, we're not saying you shouldn't try to solve your problems. We're not saying you shouldn't try to find solutions. But what we are saying, and Krishna is saying in the Gita, is that the problems come for a reason. Pain is a message to teach us something. And therefore, if you simply try to leave problems when they come, but you don't learn from problems, then you're going to kind of find that those problems perpetuate in your life. So Krishna shifts. The world teaches us act first, just get busy, do things. And philosophy, introspection, that kind of thing, you do that later in your life. But what does the Gita teach? Arjuna is on the verge of having to act. I mean, he's being pushed to act here. The war is about to start. But even though there's so much pressure on him to act, still he stops and he goes to the middle of the battlefield. And he takes the time first to ask. Like in the modern world, they have this book by Stephen Covey, Start with Why. It's like a bestseller in the world. Start with why. Because the whole world is obsessed with how and what. But if you don't know your why, if you haven't clarified your why, if you haven't asked what is your why, then your how and what may be completely empty. And therefore, Krishna gives the original start with why in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, because he teaches it's not about acting first and asking later, but asking first. And like this, I won't go through every single one, but you can see it's very, very profound. And when people hear this, it's like, wow, they just begin to think like there's a different way to approach life. There's a different way in which I can wake up tomorrow and interact with this world that may change the quality of everything I experience. And so this is one way in which we can teach the Gita. Another way we've taught the Gita is we teach how in every chapter of the Gita, Krishna is teaching Arjuna the ultimate self-development of how to do all of these things, how to overcome temptation, how to become detached, how to perfect your speech, conquer fear. And we could go in every single chapter and explain how Krishna is teaching these very, very practical life skills. For example, I'm trying to remember his name. What's one of these neo-atheists now? He's very big.
Sam Harris,
Not Sam Harris, another one?
Richard Dawkins.
Not Richard Dawkins, another one? There's one more. There's one or two more. Anyway, I can't remember his name. But his whole thing is based on this concept of Krishna in the 3rd chapter of overcoming temptation. That if humankind can learn this art of avoiding their kind of carnal temptations, their immediate impulses, then their life will just shift. So it's very powerful. He's Christian. He's I don't know. Sorry, he's not neo-atheist. He's a Christian, like Jordan Peterson. That's the one. Jordan Peterson. He's huge. And this is one of his main teachings about how to actually control one's impulses and restraint. Restraint is a huge thing. So this is what Krishna teaches in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, because Arjuna asked this classic question: why is it that even when I know the best thing to do, that still I'm forced to act as if impelled against my own will? So Krishna teaches it in the Gita. He explains about lust and how to overcome lust. One thing we also try to do with the Gita is make it very, very practical. And in this book, we try to give different thought exercises which can deepen our mananam. You see, the Vedic process of teaching goes through different stages: Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. So we hear, but then we have to deeply contemplate. Then when we deeply contemplate, we create some change in our life, and in that way the knowledge gets embedded within a deeper space and within our consciousness. So I'll give you an example of how we facilitate, because in the world today, most of us are not able to do this mananam, this deep contemplation. We do a lot of shravanam, a lot of hearing, we grasp a lot of philosophy, but how deep it goes will be dependent on how much we contemplate. So I'll give you an example. Here in the 6th canto, Jai Shri Radha Gopinath ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki, Shri Gauranitai ki. So for example, in the 6th canto, 9th chapter, 40th verse, Srila Prabhupada writes this in the purport: even while suffering in the midst of difficulties, devotees simply offer their prayers and service more enthusiastically. In this way, they become firmly fixed in devotional service and eligible to return home, back to Godhead, without a doubt. Who thinks they're a devotee? Even while suffering in the midst of difficulties, devotees simply offer their prayers and service more enthusiastically. How many of us feel like we're there? That suffering, we are able to process suffering and difficulty in such a way that it makes us more enthusiastic. Are we there? That's what Srila Prabhupada is saying a devotee is. A devotee is one who's able to process suffering in such a way that it makes them more enthusiastic. So now, if we're saying we're not there, how are we going to get there? This is a statement, we can read it and we can say, I'm not there, let me just move to the next page. Or we can try and do something with this if we say, I'm not there. And this is what we call contemplative reading. In the Christian tradition, they also had something called Lectio Divina. And Lectio Divina was when Christian monks, what they would do is they would open the Bible and they would read, and then they would come to a sentence that really struck them. And then what they would do is they would deeply meditate on that sentence and go into a very deep contemplative journey into what was actually being said in that statement. And it would almost become a meditation within their contemplative reading. So this contemplative reading is very, very powerful, because we could read something like this and just move on, and it doesn't really move us, because we just think that's high, that's perfection, I'm not there, let me just get on with my life, chant Hare Krishna, and maybe one day I'll open the book and I'll be there. Which obviously the process does work, but there could be more we could do. We could take a statement like this and say, I'm not there, but can I ask myself some questions? You could do something called backtracking. And in this we tell people, think of a time when you went through a painful challenge or a difficulty. Think of a time when you went through suffering, and reflect on how your life has evolved since that time, and identify 3 positive things which have come from it. Now this might seem very simple, but just sitting down for a few minutes and asking yourself this question and writing it down does something, so that when you come back here, you can say, I don't naturally become more enthusiastic when I'm suffering, but I can begin to appreciate that suffering and difficulty does bring a unique element to advance my spiritual life. And therefore, this statement, which seems to be so far away from where we are, starts to look more relevant and real for us. This is what we call mananam. You could also do something like this. We call this forward facing. Now think of a difficulty and a challenge that you're going through right now. Now, based on seeing how a previous suffering brought you development, how can you now forecast how this suffering and this difficulty that you're going through now, what gifts may it bring you in your future? And when you consciously sit down and write things like this, what happens is you begin to rewire your thought process, because the philosophy is beginning to move you in a different way. We're now moving from a statement that just seems to refer to very, very advanced devotees, which I'm not, and therefore it doesn't relate to me. Rather, we're seeing how this statement, I can actually begin to internalize and appreciate that this statement has substance, and I've realized some of this statement in my life. You could also ask yourself a question like this. Think of a recurring situation that you find yourself facing again and again. Some kind of difficulty, a relationship struggle, a financial issue, emotional challenge. Can you identify a lesson that you're failing to learn which may be causing this to reappear again and again? Why does suffering reappear again and again? Because there's a lesson that we're needing to learn that we're not learning. So we can also ask ourselves these questions. But one may say, like, how do I know this is not just mental speculation, and how do I know I'm actually coming out? And therefore you can discuss with devotees. How do we actually decipher the lessons that we're supposed to learn through any given situation? And you can take this discussion and actually make it more meaningful. So this, then what happens is we become much more contemplative in our reading of philosophy. Otherwise it just becomes pages and pages and pages of information and very, very little transformation. when Srila Prabhupada's books are actually meant to give us something much more. So through doing this kind of mananam, then what happens is we read this statement and then we can appreciate it much more, and we can feel, yes, maybe one day as I internalize these things more and more, maybe I can be that devotee that when suffering comes, I can naturally process it in a way that makes me more enthusiastic. But that requires a certain way of learning and processing the knowledge. Okay, there were other things I wanted to share with you, but we just have I think 3-4 minutes left, 5 minutes left. So if there are any final questions or comments, or if anyone would like to ask anything more, then happy to take. Yes?
Maharaj, could you explain simply between the relationship between the modes of nature and energy? So between matter and energy, between modes or energy.
So what is the relationship between the modes of nature and energy? So of course different people use the word energy in different contexts, but Krishna and in our Vedanta understanding, there are different types of energy. So there's the internal energy, there's the marginal energy, and then there's the external energy. And the external energy is the material energy by which this material manifestation, this material world, the material bodies, the material facilities of this world are produced. So the modes of nature are almost the variations of that material energy. They're the various configurations of that material energy which create the diversity. It's almost like, of course, we hear often the analogy of the 3 primary colors that then mix into unlimited varieties. So in order to create the unlimited variety that's required for the material world to fulfill its function, which is to allow the living entity to enjoy in this world, the 3 modes of nature facilitate all the different external situations. So they're the manipulation, the configuration that facilitate all the external manifestations of what the living entity desires. And the material modes are also the energy which then pervade within our own consciousness, because that material energy can also pervade our consciousness or cover our consciousness. So the modes also enter within us to create the different types of mentalities that are required in order for the living entity to pursue their desires in this world. So basically, without these configurations of the 3 modes, you'd not be able to have the external variety, and you'd neither be able to have the variation of internal mentalities which allow the living entity to live out their desires in this world. So the 3 modes of nature are the configuration of the material energy which allow the living entity to live out their desires here, so that eventually they can get out of this place. So it's an ingenious model of Krishna. And if you understand these energies, then you can begin to understand how to disentangle yourself from those energies. Most people find spiritual life difficult because they don't know how to deal with the energies around them. Therefore, if you're trying to swim against the current, it's very, very difficult. Therefore, you have to swim with the current. Then with minimal energy, you get maximum gain, you get maximum traction. But because most devotees or most people in the world are just working against the modes, they're not imbibing the right modes in their life, then they become disempowered. So, this is some kind of relation between the material energy, the prakriti, that Krishna talks about, and how the modes are the variations within that Prakriti which create the variety externally and different coverings internally to allow that fulfillment of the desires. Yes?
Internal fulfillment of desires. What is Vishuddha Sattva?
So Vishuddha Sattva is when Vishuddha Sattva consciousness means when one has developed a certain amount of transcendence, that they go beyond the modes. So Krishna says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam. When one becomes absorbed in Vasudeva and he transcends the modes by his devotional accomplishment, then he becomes situated in Vishuddha Sattva, which means purified goodness. And then he's no longer, or she is no longer affected by the modes. So that's what we're trying to do. Krishna says, Tribir Gunamayi, practically everyone in the world is covered by the modes. So first we try to go to goodness, because goodness is clarifying, goodness is illuminating, goodness allows one to think more clearly, and then from there, by devotional accomplishment, we become free, even beyond goodness. That's Vishuddha Sattva. Is that okay? Alright, I think the curtains are about to open, so we'll continue on in the coming days discussing the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.